Declaring the country's electricity crisis a state of disaster, the appointment of an electricity minister, as well as the expansion of the employment tax incentive. These are some of the major announcements made by President Cyril Ramaphosa last night. But the question on many South Africans' lips is, will he deliver? Well, BLSA CEO Busisiwe Mavuso joins me now to delve in more into this. Thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Just firstly, your immediate reaction to what the President said yesterday.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. So I think it was interesting because let's agree that it was an impossible speech that he actually had to give, and it was structured on appealing to the hope and perseverance and the resilience of South Africans. But I'm afraid when we face such a myriad of challenges, hope and resilience and whatever else doesn't really cut it. You could see as he was actually going through the issues and the plans, it is clearly an expansionary program that is meant to revive the economy and boost our GDP, as it should. I was interested to see the theme of a pro-business ideological shift that was actually continued. We spoke a lot about business and private sector collaboration and coming to the party in all the cases, but it's also been saying this for quite some time, and it does happen on some other areas, but it actually doesn't happen on others, and I really hope that this time around, he can really read his ministers the Riot Act, that you're going to collaborate with the private sector, period. Because when you look at it, when he spoke about the issue of ESCOM, for instance, he spoke about what we've always spoken about. He really didn't have anything around how we fix ESCOM. He spoke about on ESCOM, we need to fix power stations, we need to deploy engineers, we need to procure from neighboring countries, the national shared debt solution. So it's the same story that we've had over and over again. And it was interesting for me when I was speaking about the issue that you outlined around the water ministry. And he said, I pleaded with the water minister to make sure that the project is done soon. And I'm thinking that, but this is not time for him to be pleading with his ministers. Where are the KPAs? Where are the KPIs? At what point do we actually hold them accountable? At what point do we actually make sure, that they are guided by performance contracts that will actually force delivery on some of these critical issues? I was glad about the fact that he started on the broader issues of the dysfunctionality of the network, because it was important that he actually starts there, because let's accept that without the proper functioning of the network industries, I'm afraid as a country we cannot continue to shout that South Africa is open for business, because we are really not. Without the proper functioning of the network industries, our environment is not conducive for investment. Neither is it conducive for business to operate in. So it's therefore going to be a useless exercise for us to go and do an investment conference in April and set higher targets of 2 trillion rands when people are going to sit with factories that are going to be load shed for 10 hours a day, when people are going to have to put their own alternatives, in as far as energy is concerned, when people are going to have to actually put in boreholes for water, when they're actually going to have to bypass the Durban ports and go and land their consignment at Maputo because Durban ports is dysfunctional. So I think that was important. State of disaster, I really don't know, what that is really going to achieve. He outlined what it was going to achieve. But I think for me, the main concern is, are we going to put guardrails this time around to ensure that as we have a state of disaster that allows us to bypass certain processes, to actually go to certain suppliers directly without, doing a broader procurement, normal program type of thing, is this not an opportunity, for us or for the country or for those who are involved in these things, government officials in a lot of cases, to loot the money blindly the way they did, during COVID. We have seen in COVID how money that was meant for PPE, money that was actually meant to provide food parcels for the hungry, was actually unashamedly stolen. But by some government officials and government ministers. So what guardrails this time around? Actually, he didn't speak about that. He spoke as if it's going to be usual. And I think in an environment where we have such a deep-rooted culture of corruption, it was really concerning. The Minister of Electricity in the presidency, bad idea. Eskom is already struggling with reporting to 2 ministries, which is DMRE and DPE, and then they have to report to National Treasury, and then they have to report to Environmental Affairs, and then they have to report to MESA, and then they've got the parliamentary committees. I think adding
and now
to
the
that
presidency.
especially Right, exactly, because there's the Operation Vulindlela. Yes, you're actually right, Operation Vulindlela team, and then there is NECOM. So you are not taking the entire electricity portfolio and you're giving it to the Minister of Electricity. You are actually saying, I'm adding you, but the staff that is actually going to stay with DPE, the overseeing of some parts of whatever. So I really think that is their idea, and I really don't is how it's going to work.
And the business incentives, especially, even the mention that there would be some type of assistance for small business as well.
I think that was actually interesting. But Masako, again, he speaks about a bounce-back scheme. Remember, this is the same bounce-back scheme that we actually had during COVID. And a lot of SMEs will tell you how difficult it was to actually, access that thing. So I wonder, the devil is in the detail. Is it coming back in its previous form? Because if it is coming back in its previous form, then it's a useless exercise. And I hope that this current iteration of it is going to be a much more improved version, of the loan scheme. And I'm really hoping that, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he said that this is going to be managed by the SASME fund. They are going to put in 2.5 billion as government, and they're expecting the private sector to put another 7.5 billion. I think the person who actually manages this scheme, is also going to matter. Again, if you give it to the same government, if you give it to the same, you also mentioned the CIFA. I wonder, is this going to be sitting at CIFA? If you put it, within the government, agencies, I worry myself that, again, my question would be, what guardrails do we have this time around to ensure that these monies that are actually given from the fiscals benefit those whom they are intended to benefit, instead of them, instead of this being another looting spree, for government officials.
And I mean, you mentioned earlier on that there's been so many plans that the president has announced. For instance, there was the plan that he shared with South Africans around July last year. And in the past 100 days or more, this is when we've started experiencing load shedding every single day without a break. Do you trust that any of what he said yesterday would actually assist if we have the crisis committee that was appointed immediately after his July address on our energy crisis, and still things are getting worse?
But isn't NECOM that crisis committee? I think, Masako, let's also be clear, you can't run a country on committees. I think we're going to have to get to a point where he issues a directive and it is actually implemented. He's going to have to hold his ministers accountable. He's going to have to hold his deputy ministers and DGs accountable. These committees, when I see the Minister of the Electricity, for instance, is now going to be sitting in the presidency, because the state is inefficient, he is therefore centralizing everything in the presidency, which I don't think, it's like, this thing, I've employed you to do X, and because you're not doing it, I'm actually going to find a roundabout way of how...
But I'll still keep you in the meantime.
And still keep you in the meantime. How does that work? And I really would have thought that him having been given the second term, should be an affirmation and validation, of him to actually, robustly drive the reform agenda. So he doesn't, if he had worries the first term around, I'm going to have to tread carefully because of, I need to secure the second term. It's got the second term now, there's not that term, unless they introduce it. So isn't this then an opportunity for him to actually be decisive, about what he actually wants to implement, in as far as these issues are concerned. So I worry that we seem to be talking... Masako, there was nothing new. He said what he has always said, except for the state of disaster, which leaves us worried, about a potential looting spree, and this minister was going to create more confusion. There was really nothing new. So this says that it is not, and I think he said that at the beginning, we are not issuing a new plan, we are actually just reiterating and focusing on the issues that were focused on before, and I think it's going to have to drive that.
Well, Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of BLSA, thank you very much for your time.